Hello and welcome to another edition of Debunking the Vigilant Christian. This time, he's decided to tell us why the Mayans, of all people, are evil, and demonstrates how he fails miserably in doing so.
Now, I was into the New Age movement myself, so I know where they're coming from. I used to look at the Mayan people and study Mayan spirituality and think that it was highly advanced. I was also deceived to believe this. I was studying things like the Mayan calendar in 2012 and the different things that the Mayan calendar can teach you in terms of the transformation of consciousness and things like that.
Actually, TVC, if you'd actually done your research, you'd find out that there are no classical or pre-classical sources for this bogus prophecy that, of course, didn't come to pass, largely because not even the Mayans themselves actually believe in it.
So I was heavily involved in this, and I fell for it just like most modern New Agers do. And the thing is, they will tend to believe that they're very advanced, that the Mayan people were in communication with spiritual beings that enlightened them, that taught them how to build these pyramids, showed them things about our star system that even today we're just starting to discover, and things like that. So
we're not even 2 minutes into this and you already pull the ancient alien card, but I'm going to go into that a little later. Also, the picture you flashed here is actually not Mayan, but Aztec in origin, which I find a little strange that you would show this because the Aztecs, like you, were a bunch of homophobic tossers that built their civilization by mooching off the cultural and technological achievements of others. And there goes my Central Mexican audience. But no, in all seriousness, we know that the Aztecs, unlike the Mayans, frowned on homosexuality, and the Aztecs, building on the successes of the Toltecs and the Mixtecs, were no more guilty of that than the Toltecs and the Mixtecs incorporating concepts from Teotihuacan into their culture.
So, if you read a lot of the literature in the New Age movement, they're going to paint the Mayans as some awesome, highly advanced spiritual civilization. And ultimately, that's just not the truth at all. The Mayan, in fact, were a very primitive people. If you truly study the Mayans, you're going to see that these are, uncivilized people who lived in bushes.
Yeah. Apart from this city, and this one too. Oh, and let's not forget that we found Mayan art in central Mexican cities, and there's even ample evidence to suggest that Teotihuacan had a Mayan quarter, a kind of little Yucatan, if you will.
Now, why were they so advanced? That's because of their interaction with the fallen gods, the fallen angels. They're not gods, there's only one true God, but all throughout history they've been meeting and interacting with human civilizations like the Mayans and deceiving them into thinking that they are gods and they are to be worshipped.
This is a rough timeline of Mayan history, and since I know that there are probably a number of people listening to me right now who aren't that familiar with Mayan history to begin with, indulge me while I take you on a trip down history lane. The Archaic Age is essentially the age where we found the first archaeological evidence for the settlement of Yucatan Peninsula and central Mexico, and it's characterized by the rise of the first small towns and kingdoms that would then later shape the face of this part of the world as we know it. The pre-classic is characterized by the appearance of the Olmecs and Teotihuacan's rise to power. It is also the time that Mayan civilization got big. And with big, I mean huge. According to estimates, cities like Nakbe, El Mirador, and Cuello may have had a population of as much as 80 to 100,000. A size comparable to, or even greater than, any city in ancient Egypt, Greece, or Babylon. The only larger city was Rome. Also, the La Data complex in El Mirador, depending on the source, was 172 meters tall, and thus the tallest pyramid and building ever built until the advent of skyscrapers in the 1920s. The beginning of the Mayan Classic can largely be pinpointed to the time when Teotihuacan entered the Mayan lands and introduced the concept of the warrior king. The Classic is also the time in which pretty much all of the famous monuments were built and populations everywhere exploded again after a long hiatus. Incidentally, this is also the time that many Mayan vases were created and art, culture, and literature reached their absolute height, even though the latter is sadly only written in stone. The Classic is also the era in which the power of Teotihuacan fades until the city is destroyed sometime in the 8th century. But it's also the time that cities like Kaaba, Labna, and Sayil first appear on the archaeological radar. The post or late Classic is the time in which most of the famous tourist destinations were built and inhabited. Chichen Itza, Kaaba, Labna, Etna, Uxmal, all of these famous destination spots stem from that era. Of course, the late Classic is also the time in which the Aztecs rise to power, and they were also the first civilization on the American continent to introduce compulsory public education. The Spanish time, as the name suggests, is of course characterized by the arrival of the Spanish and the Spanish conquest. However, in this case, there is a strong temporal overlap between the late Classic and the Spanish time because while the Spanish had already conquered much of the Yucatan lowlands, people in the highlands were still living according to the late classical, in some cases even still classical ways. And while the Spanish time wasn't the greatest period in Mayan history, it is worth noting that in this time that we get the first translation of the Popol Vuh, and considering that the first two books are also described in classical and even pre-classical art, it makes this the oldest Mayan text not written in stone. And lastly, we come to the modern era, i.e. the present day. The beginning of this era is marked by Spain losing even the very last of its colonies in the Americas and the rise of the big five modern quote-unquote Mayan nation-states: Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, and Belize, which later transferred to Britain and eventually gained its independence in 1981. The modern era is also the time of discovery, be it the rediscovery of all the ancient sites like Copan or Tikal, or the rediscovery of the own distinct Mayan identity through culture and language long suppressed by a predominantly Hispanic environment. But getting back to your point on Ancient Aliens, TVC, people like you who make that claim that the Mayans were visited by aliens usually cite one or all three of the following pieces of quote-unquote evidence: the Dresden Codex, the Mayan diver statues that appear to look like astronauts, and of course the main pyramid of Chichen Itza known as the Castillo. There's just one problem with that. They're all from the post or late Classic. This means that the people who are so desperate to push the ancient alien idea are perfectly happily and willingly ignoring the previous 3,500 years of Mayan history, in which we can clearly see the increasing complexity of monumental architecture, writing, and scientific advancement as far as their metal-less world allowed them to make. And TVC, if you want to try your luck in passing off the engravings on Pakal's tomb as Pakal sitting in an astronaut chair on his way to a place you can't even imagine with your limited mind, then I have three things to say. Firstly, fuck you, because this argument was made in the fucking 60s, where we were only able to read like 5% of the Mayan writing. Secondly, fuck you, because you're obviously too lazy to do any real research on the lunacy you believe without question. And thirdly, even if I were to accept your non-evidence that you probably would prop up in defense to my previous statements, it still leaves you standing on shaky ground, as you still would have to explain the 2,500 years of cultural and technological advancements made until the mid-classic. Oh, and with regards to your claim that there is only one true God, it seems very odd then that your God would use personal pronouns like we and us when talking about himself and his creation in the book you believe to be his direct revelation. The answer to this question is of course trivial, as Yahweh, Allah, Elohim, or whatever you want to call the Abrahamic God, used to be part of a Trinitarian pantheon, and this apparently slipped past the people who later compiled the Torah.
By fallen angels. Look how the Mayan people were deceived. They weren't advanced. These people were primitive, who were in communication with fallen angels who taught them how to do blood sacrifices, drink blood, and all these weird things, you know. This is not divine, enlightened spirituality. So, like I've been saying throughout the entire series here with Spirit Science, we're dealing with massive deception.
I don't even know what's funnier at this point. The fact that you again didn't do any research and again pass off the Aztecs as Mayan, the fact that this piece of art isn't even actually Aztec in origin, but Spanish, or the fact that you weren't even smart enough to go to Google and find real Mayan images of Mayans conducting human sacrifice. Before we get to the savagery in your inerrant and divine revelation, I want to clear a few things up regarding Mayan sacrifice, something that you apparently don't know about. You see, every mention of human sacrifice in Mayan record surprisingly also coincides with a political turmoil of some sort or another. So, unlike you would like your drooling inbreds of followers believe, TVC, the Mayans didn't conduct human sacrifice because Satan told them to do it, but in fact, in most cases, it was a convenient way to not only keep the dumb masses in line and the cosmic gravy train from toppling over, but also a convenient way of disposing of political adversaries. But getting back to the savagery in your own book, it's telling that, by the way you keep characterizing it, it clearly means that you've never actually read it, or at least looked at anything other than the happy, happy, happy verses you were spoon-fed during your extensive indoctrination process. Especially you choose to ignore the book of Joshua, which is pretty much just beheadings all around, as well as the part where one of your oh-so-beloved prophets instructs his followers to, quote, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman that hath known a man by lying with him. But all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. Now how's that for biblical morality? Also, for someone who prides himself in being so anti-racism and pro-tolerance, don't you think it's a little bit racist and intolerant of you and your sorts to assume that the Mayans weren't able to achieve what they achieved without external help, and were only able to build wood huts and plow fields? And lastly, considering that, unlike you would like to believe, the Mayans were never really converted but merely co-opted Christianity into their pre-existing belief system the way they did with Central Mexican beliefs, it does make your oh-so-mighty Emmanuel seem more like an incompetent buffoon, doesn't it? Thanks for watching, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you in the next video.